Hello, Agnes.
Hi, Robin.
Today we're going to discuss a book, or at least jump off from there, called Ritual and Its Consequences, an essay on the limits of sincerity and something else I can't see here, but um, in the PDF title, it's very long, by Seligman, Weller, Witt, and Simon.
Okay. I think
And,
it's an essay on the limits of sincerity. That's
oh, okay, there wasn't more to it than I missed. So I liked, you had pointed me to this book, although I think I had had a copy and then somehow lost it. But anyway, but I liked how many different concepts this book was trying to take on, and they're all interesting concepts. Although I fear it just throws them all out there and doesn't integrate them that well. But the thesis is what I suggest focusing on initially here, which is this contrast the authors want to make between a ritual orientation and a sincere orientation. In their mind, that is their central thesis. So, not terrible to focus on that initially. And to highlight it, I want to bring your attention to, say, page 106 in Ritual and Its Consequences
PDF
of
or
the PDF. Well, but I mean, it's at the top of in the PDF, it's the number at the top. So it would be in the text. It's not what is the page on 123, I guess, is the PDF page number.
okay. All right.
And the authors go through a sequence of what they see as iconic, sincere stances. And it's nice to sort of see the range of them in order to get their sense of what sincerity is, what it means. So he starts out with the Calvinist, "Am I really saved?" and the teenagers, "Am I really in love?" are at hearts similar kind of questions. They are sincere questions about, what you really feel. Um, and then he has the example of, in Russia or China, the search for a true revolutionary consciousness. And this is on the next page, 107. And uh, analogously, in the 19th century springtime of the peoples, there was the being at one with the spirit of one's folk as a different sort of truth. And then he gives an example of a Sartre book, Iron in the Soul, where it's about a workers' movement in Paris and how great it is to sort of have that unidirectional sense of self-purpose. That's a sincere stance. And then he talks about Puritan rule. And I think that's it in terms of a range of descriptions of what sincerity is, which I thought was helpful. That is, um, he at some point gives a summary of the distinction of a ritual and sincerity, but to find it here at the moment. But I think it talks about ritual as being focused on actions and making sure you're doing the right actions, etc., and sincerity as a focus on whether you have the right internal stance or attitude and wanting to drive your actions from that sincere, proper attitude. And the book is trying to say the modern world has neglected the ritual stance relative to the sincere stance. And this, I think, is the essence of the criticism, in that if we take these examples of sincerity, I think what we're supposed to see is they can't all make sense together. That is, some of these people trying to see, for example, you know, the real people's view of their nation, we might look at that and go, well, you're forcing that on the situation. That's not a real thing. But in their view of the world, that was the real thing that they were really wanting to find in themselves, because their whole view of their world had at the center of it that stance. And that's what it is to be sincere, they're saying, is to take this idealized view of the world and insist on it so strongly that you force everything around that one purported internal variable or stance or, feature. And they're saying that just doesn't usually exist. It's too strong an idealization that, in fact, reality is more complicated than that. And you're just going to be unhappy if you try too hard to force this sincerity. I think that's how I'm reading their critique here.
So it seems to me that this definition, the definition of sincerity that we get here, is in a weird way pretty close to the definition of ritual that we get at the beginning of the book. So the way they set up ritual at the beginning of the book is that a ritual world is a world as if, as opposed to the world as is. That is, that there is this point of view that we can take on the world where we don't introduce any fictions to it. We just let it be what it really is. That's the sincere world. That's the world as is. And the world, the ritual world, the world as if, is a world that involves an idealization. It involves taking a way that we see things and projecting it onto a small space. And it's critical in their view that it's a small space. So the ritual world is only a small part. It only claims a small part of the world, so it's going to be the world of a certain tribe or maybe a certain play, or a given interaction. Um, and um, and the thought is that we need these sheltered, little, subjunctive, idealized, as if worlds, um, worlds that can never be the totality of the way things really are. We need that for our social life. And the sort of sincerity threatens to blot that out. But on the picture that I just gave, the sincere world would be um sort of like a which they sometimes describe it this way, like the world of capitalism or something. A world of
Just a
atom-
harsh competitions at the
yeah,
beginning, like,
atomized individuals that have to interact inside an undifferentiated global order, or even atomized individuals that stand in abstract moral relations to one another, right? So, like, if there's just a kind of absolute morality and we just have to interact in accord with that absolute morality, that would be another annihilation of ritual. So, it seems to me that the passages that he's describing in this, uh, you know, uh like the need to establish this Calvinist, and the teenager in love is something like, an attempt to take a given domain of ritual and make it somehow totalizing. So it's something like um, it's a transformation of ritual into sincerity or something like that. It's something more complicated than just that sincerity.
I agree. That is, initially, the book starts out with this idea that there's just the ordinary world, but the ordinary world is not very good, and that we do better by constructing these as if worlds and then acting as if in them. So saying please and thank you, for example,
Exactly.
and being polite, and being generous, and talking as if we understand each other. So they initially rationalize ritual and its value through I mean, they just define it as if, and the book has an enormously wide range of uses of as if, and they aren't, there isn't an obvious thing they all share in common. But clearly, I'm convinced there is this capacity for as if, and it's a strong capacity that we do use a lot. But apparently, there is this conflict that often we get unhappy with as if because it feels insincere, I guess. It feels like we are pretending too much, and we should stop pretending. Or we want to stop pretending sometimes. I think the modern world is more set aside, at least the overt embracement of such pretense. But that's why I was intrigued by this later discussion. The core of their critique of sincerity, of, isn't so much that I mean, initially the critique was, well, we will lose the benefits of being polite and acting as if we like each other, and that we are kind and understanding for each other, et cetera. And that would be the problem with sincerity. But in the passages I was just pointing to, it's a very different critique of sincerity. it's a critique of sincerity as being yet another as if world that we are taking too literally and insisting on. And that's they have a lot of the discussion about the benefits of this ritual or as if world is the fluidity of being able to go in and out of them and to not take them all literally and having some ambiguity and sort of mixing and matching them. And that basically a tolerance for inconsistency and a bit of hypocrisy is okay. And then here they're fleshing that out by saying there just is not this world as it is isn't a thing in some sense is what they're saying. At least it's not a thing you can socially actually use very reliably. And when you try to insist on the world as a thing, what you end up insisting on is a particular as if world that your community has generated. And when you try to insist that everything be framed in terms of these core elements of this world as you've imagined it, you're insisting on things that aren't really there. And that's what you're causing problems. That is the problem with sincerity is there is no sincerity. Really, at least that's the way it seems here.
Right, so that would be interesting, right? It would be like there's that line, like, "Facts don't care about your feelings." It would be like, there are no facts. That is, there's no just statement about the way the world is. That can't enter into our relations to each other. Everything we say is socially, accepted and therefore, reflects our socialization. Um which would be pretty radical view. But, I mean, they do say something earlier in the book about why the demands of sincerity come in. And at least one reason why they come in is attempts to close the ritual order. So, like that is the space of ritual tends to become canonized. There's a tendency to say these are the rules and they're fixed and they're done, and this is how we're going to do it forever. Um, and um, and that's a block against as they tell the story. This is around page 40. Uh, uh, a as they tell the story, that's a block against sort of too many sages. The problem with sages is they get to make up rules. Um, and so
Including the rule that there's no more rules.
sorry? Right,
Including the
exactly. Or there's no rules for that or something like that.
right.
So you have this problem with, um, people being able to make up rules and make up rituals, and a response to that problem is to say, "No, our ritual order is set, it's complete, we're just gonna keep going like this forever." And then that provokes the response of, "It's not sincere." So ritual closure. So one way to read this book is just to say, there's a problem internal to the ritual system. There is only a ritual system, right? Because there's no real dealing with the world as is. But the ritual system will there's a pressure towards closing it off, and when it gets too closed off and innovation becomes impossible, then people start to notice that it's fake, that it's only how things as if it's not how things really are, and so then there's a demand for sincerity. And you could read the later passages that you were, pointing to about the Calvinists, etc., as like maybe we could just it's like the war to end all war, it's the ritual to end all rituals. Like, maybe if we just had, the kingdom of heaven on earth or something like that, or the total moral law, then we could have this form of ritual that would encompass everything, and it would be final, and it would be closed, and we would be done. So it's a kind of you could read it they don't put it this way, but you could read it as a kind of attempt at ritual closure that forestalls any future worries about sincerity.
So on this, you know, trying to deconstruct, I guess, these sincere descriptions, they have a little section there in the pages I was talking to you about a couple and the ritual of saying I love you.
Mhm.
And
What page
there-
is that again? Give me the PDF number, not the
a PDF number is 123, the one I started on.
okay, yeah. Huh?
Um, and they basically say that this ritual I love you, they say its a performative aspect is more important than its denotative function, i.e., the married relationship can last for decades via these sorts of rituals, and that if they try to inquire too deeply and do they really love each other without these sorts of rituals, it will fall apart and they won't last, is the claim here. That
Yeah.
is, Uh, a marriage can't last for 30 years on sort of just the "do I feel like I'm in love" is the claim. That doesn't work.
Note, no footnotes here.
Well,
No evidence provided for this,
right.
what a marriage can survive on. But okay, this is a problem with this book more generally.
True, true, right.
Give a lot of
And I mean, and this idea of true love is one of our current society's sort of more core, sincere notions. So this is challenging that. But I think when we see the Calvinist and the nationalist, etc., we can more see that maybe their concept of sincerity is something they've constructed and will fall apart if they examine it too closely. But that is again, I mean, they're making the argument that you just follow the rituals, just just go with these as ifs and don't ask too closely whether they can all be made sense of in terms of some deep, sincere parameters. And one of them talks earlier in the book about the Confucianist point of view.
yeah.
And basically, from the Confucianist point of view, as presented, is that don't even worry about having the right motives or the right feelings or anything. Just keep doing the right things.
Yeah.
If you just practice doing the right things, you will just be a good person, and it doesn't really matter what you feel or intend or your internal s- emotional stance. And that's presented as something also that the or some Jewish scholars had presented also as a view of Judaism. That and they're I think they're trying to positively tell moderns that maybe that's okay. Maybe it would be okay to see being a good person as doing the right things and practicing doing the right things, and it doesn't so much matter what you feel or your intentions or your internal sincere state.
Right. So I think I hadn't thought about it this way when I read the book, but I now think it's worth noticing that the space of ritual, which is a social space of certain kinds of interactions, and it's important that there are particular kind of interactions, they tend to be repetitive, done the same way every time, etc. That space has to be contrasted with the non-social space. That is the world as is. But there are two kinds of non-social spaces. They're both important and they're interestingly different. One of them is the internal world of your mind and your intentions. And the other is just like the world of nature and the ways in which it subjects you to, being struck by lightning or whatever might happen to you. That is the social order is this like safe space basically from the kind of vagaries of the natural world. And I think that what in effect it's a kind of um it's a very sociological point of view to say that the more important point of view is that social to think at that social level. And, the way things go in the natural world, like the laws of science, all that doesn't matter very much. And your internal states, they don't matter very much. What matters is that we engage in certain repetitive behaviors together. That's what life is really all about.
It seems like you could maybe give them a more positive view if you said they completely respect the real physical world and how that's important, but they see you can improve on that by creating these as if worlds, and that requires that you know act as if and set aside your doubts in some ways in order to be as if, but that this internal real true emotional world, that's not the true physical world. That's another made up world. That I think that's kind of their critique is you're treating that as if it was the same sort of real thing constraint like the rest of the physical world, like the lightning that might strike you. And I think that's what their criticism is directed against, not the sort of real world outside of your internal feelings.
I guess I think the um kind of um critique of capitalism that's at least implied at certain points, it suggests there is also a critique of the outer world. That is what they want. They want the social world to be differentiated in a certain way, to form these little subgroups. And if we stand in some kind of economic unity, then that would be external in a way that threatens the world of ritual, I think. Um,
I agree that they think that too simple-minded an attitude toward the actual world is detrimental and that people should be allowed to make more distinctions. So they have this critique of the modern world as, some UN declaration is not allowing as many distinctions among people as ritual does. And they want to push back against that and say, when we make more distinctions among ourselves, including nations and classes and things like genders, I guess, that that allows a richer as if world that can make us rise higher than this capitalist dog eat dog world that we would fall into without ritual. But I still think they're distinguishing that from the sincere world, that the internal emotions and the sincerity. I think they are reserving their strongest criticism for that.
only do internal emotions, and I think they would say similar things about the world of internal emotions, namely, they're not gonna deny that that's a real thing that exists. What they want to deny is that it, has a kind of like preeminence.
Priority, that it should be the center and
Right,
origin
and
of
I think they
everything.
would say the same thing about the world of economic transactions, right? That
Right.
Rashid understands it as giving you the fundamental picture of how human beings relate to each other. So I think it's just like to carve out this space is to deny the um sort of like lexical priority either of like the, you know, retreat of the inner part of the mind and your intentions or the outer world which could be thought of naturalistically and that's how they think in the earlier parts of the book, and it could also be thought of as the like global economic order.
I think I agree. Now they are ambiguous, so they use this word ritual in one sense for all as if things,
Yeah.
which then includes, politeness norms, it includes play, it includes fiction, everything else becomes ritual by this general thing. But then they also use the word ritual for the more specific religious or spiritual rituals, which then have distinctive features from some of the other ones, that they are more repetitive. It even talks about their particular function as sort of, being able to enter the world where there is a deity and there is an order and there's justice imposed by the deity, and that's a nice world to be able to enter. Uh, and I guess they seem to be ambiguous about whether it's true. That is, I think they're really recommending that religion can have this value for you, and you don't have to believe it's true exactly, but you just have to set that question aside and be able to enter it as if, and see the world in at least the religious ritual as if it were true, and that has important advantages. Although I think at some point they say you can't actually have that work and take this distant stance of thinking it's all just a social function or something, right? They have this story about you couldn't take Durkheim's view, and that doesn't work for you for religion. Seeing it from the outside as something bonding you together, you'll have to see it from within that ritual. But somehow, it's not clear whether you're seeing it as true. That is, you're seeing it as if. So, but some of these as ifs you see, you're supposed to see. For example, he says the religious rituals are permanent and are of context independent, whereas playful rituals are temporary and, based on particular assumptions you make at the beginning of play. But when you go into the religious ritual, you're going into the same one God who rules the entire universe forever. And you go back into the same ritual and it's the same setup. So it's a constant true everywhere as if. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I I also think that that constant true everywhere as if is precisely what pushes in the totalizing direction, which then tries to establish the as if world as the only real world that there is, it might be in the kingdom of heaven or whatever.
Right.
Um, and that's why they think that um that sort of trends towards religious fundamentalism. That's what, in their view, religious fundamentalism is. Um,
Right. But then the question is, what is a non-fundamentalist stance toward religion exactly?
yeah.
What exactly do you believe then? Or is it somehow you're not supposed to have beliefs? You're just supposed to act and follow the rituals?
Like, the example they give that should be most relatable to us is the one about that you've already referred to. If I say, like, "Please pass the salt," instead of just saying, "Pass the salt," then there's no real truth value of please. I'm not giving you more information by saying please, but I am like recognizing your agency, formally recognizing your ability to decline, right? To not pass the salt and treating you as my equal within the context of the interaction, which they call the illusion of equality, right? So, and now it's going to have to be, well, so do I see you as my equal or not when I say please, right? It's the illusion of equality, but maybe I need to be taken in by the illusion as long as I'm using the word please. Um, uh, or maybe I just don't think about it. Like they say, well, it's just not very important whether it's true. So maybe you don't think about whether it's true. So there's a couple of possibilities. You're taken in by the illusion. So while I'm saying please to you, I think you're my equal, even though you're really not. Uh, I I somehow, while I saying please to you, I avoid thinking about the question of whether you're my equal. And so I just don't think about whether it's true or not. Um, but it kind of seems like the critique that they want to give of the domain of sincerity, it all devolves back into like this messed up thing that we're doing with these as if worlds where you both have to say that we think that things are that way, and you at the same time have to deny that we think that things are that way. And of course, they're gonna, kind of roll around in that and say, oh, it's an embrace of contradiction, etc. But I think there's just actually a problem there. There's a problem of how one inhabits such a space, and maybe it's like inevitable that this kind of thing would break down eventually. This doesn't make that much sense.
It seems like a lot of the function of these sorts of rituals is intended to be outside the scope of the ritual. So if you think of like saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag or something, the point just isn't to feel united with the nation during the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance, right? It's that like when there's a war on, you go fight in the war because you have this sense of Pledge of Allegiance, right? Or even in the religion and the religious ritual, you so devoted to the religion that if there's a religious war, you fight there. Or in the marriage, it's not just I say I love you, but I stay with you for 30 years, right? So there's this open question of the relationship between the as if entrance to this world that's related to another, lifetime of behaviors that is directly influenced by supposedly the stances and feelings that you generate in the ritual.
That's a good point. So, and maybe that's a kind of weakness where they really want to think about ritual as continuous with play. That is like a ritual for them is very much like a game that has um, a structure and a set of conceits that you operate in accordance with while you're playing the game. Um, and then when the game's over, it's over and you're doing something else. And it looks like an important disanalogy is that with rituals, the effect of the ritual is supposed to be felt in that social world, even when the ritual is over, whereas that's not supposed to be true about games.
Right. So it's not clear actually that ritual is as you know, if I'm in the ritual, eating the wafer as if it was the body of Christ or something, the point is that has a relationship to what happens outside the ritual. I'm the as if is extending there. That's part of the point of religious rituals, presumably. Say a marriage ceremony, right? I mean, he talks about a marriage ceremony as an as if thing, but the whole point is it's supposed to set up this marriage. It's supposed to be lasting a long time.
Right. Right. So there's a question about I guess this is partly why when a ritual becomes sort of empty or hollow, you don't keep doing it because it will stop having the relevant effect, right? You could still keep up with the performance,
Right.
but if it isn't creating the result that you want, you have no incentive to keep up with the performance.
Right. So, like when two business people make a deal and they shake hands, the shaking of hands is a ritual, And it's an as if world. I'm not stabbing you in the back with my knife because here's my hand out in front of you with no knife in it. But it's supposed to be making sure that we go ahead with the deal and that we don't betray each other after we walk away from shaking hands, right? So it's not, I mean, if it's as if over a much longer time and scope than the mere shaking of the hands. Same way for the marriage ceremony. Like if you could say marriage isn't as if, the whole marriage isn't as if, and we agree, we start at that first moment to treat each other as if we were going to stay with each other forever and like each other, etc. And that's what a marriage is. And we have these other rituals to support it. But the whole marriage is then the as if, not the marriage ceremony.
Right, so maybe what you need are little worlds within little worlds, right? So there's the big world, um,
Right.
and then there's the world of the marriage, which is a little world, and then there's the rituals, which are the even littler world inside the little world that establish in some way the boundaries of the little world, the marriage.
That initiate. So often rituals are at transitions like graduation ceremony or something. So we might say, well, what's really going on is we have these as if worlds and we need a specifically vivid as if world to tell us that we're entering a new as if world. Like when, beginning you say, hey, you want to play? If you're a little kid and you got some neighborhood kids, hey, you want to play? I want to play dragon. And that's a little ritual, but that's an especially important ritual because that'll set the as if for the rest of the playing dragon. And then for especially important as if, we need a whole especially important entrance as if.
Right, right, but it is an interesting, like, I think it's interesting that with games, we don't necessarily need a ritual in order to start the ritual of the game. Like you could, for instance, have with your friends a ritual of how you choose what game you're going to play. Um uh or you could just all talk about which one you want to play. And those would both be perfectly fine ways of getting into the space of the game. But it looks like for these other for life rituals, we want there to be a ritual that initiates the the little world.
I guess there's a way in which we anticipate it might be hard to sustain the as if, like marriage, whereas it won't be so hard to sustain the board game.
Mm.
And that we need something we see as especially powerful as a sign and prod to have a chance that this other as if will be able to be sustained against the various obstacles and things that can work against it. And that's the idea maybe of the marriage ceremony is to go, we're going to do this as if to say we're really serious about marriage and it's really a real thing and we care a lot about and that's important to all of us and we're all here to make sure it happens. And so, we're all saying, yeah, there could be big obstacles, but we here are as if we're really committed to this thing and we're really going to work at it.
Yeah. So maybe that's connected to the kind of religious fundamentalism, um that tendency towards religious fundamentalism, which I think from these authors' point of view is of a piece with like the tendency towards reform movements, stuff, everything from
Right.
the Protestant Reformation, the French Revolution, the Feminist Revolution, etc., the anti-colonial, that all of that is a kind of uh, ritual to end all rituals. It's like we're pessimistic about the sustainability of any ritual except the one which would be in some way final, where there could be no ritual after that. There could be no correction or something like that. So it's not that we don't have any ritual, it's just that we only want these really
Right.
big ones.
So I guess a fundamentalist stance toward marriage would be that you're actually supposed to keep the promises you make in the ceremony, perhaps. That seems like the analog of a fundamentalist stance toward religion, where you think God actually did go up into the sky and he's actually coming back someday, right? And I mean, would they also want, I mean, they seem to be critical of fundamentalist religion. Would they also be critical of fundamentalist marriage? let's just have the ceremony and like, but we're not actually committed to each other that much. We're really going to be opportunistic here, but it's nice to have the ceremony.
Right. Well, that second thing is what most people have, right? They have
Both,
they, they
or say, think about law, right? So law is certainly a place where we do some rituals in order to create the as if that we're going to be very serious about the legal case in front of us. But a fundamentalist attitude toward the law is, and you mean it. You're actually, as the juror, going to look at the evidence and only, prosecute, declare he's guilty if you actually think he's guilty. But that's a fundamentalist attitude toward being a juror. Are they thinking that that's going too far and that's too sincere?
right. So Um, I think that, I think with marriage, they would say, "Yeah, it is going too far." That is most people don't, right? Like, they might say, "Till death do we part," but I don't think that they think they've committed themselves to not getting divorced under any circumstance or something, even though they have committed themselves in the speech, right?
They said it, right?
They said it, but they didn't mean it, and they didn't even no one thought they meant it. Um, I think that with the law, like, I think that there's parts of it I don't think we mean all like, "In God we trust," or whatever.
Yeah.
There's parts of it where you're, like, swearing on the Bible, like, do you mean something by swearing on the Bible? Is it that the Bible will go up in flames if you um, I
Right.
most people are fine with a bunch of that not being taken very literally.
But I think it's important that they all think some of it will be taken pretty literally. That is, since it seems to me that some degree of sincerity is assumed by a lot of institutions and most people in them, including them. I don't know if they really want to embrace a fully never sincere thing.
There are rituals that there are sort of limiting case, like contracts, right? Like the signing of a contract. Is that a ritual? I mean, in a way, yes. But it is also something where it's meant to be taken literally. Um, and that you can litigate if it doesn't get taken literally. And I think a lot of sort of legal proceedings are similar to contract in that way. And uh
Then whether we call it a ritual depends on what stance we take about sincerity toward it,
yeah.
right? So you might their criticism of that is, oh, sure, it's fine to say you shouldn't be too sincere about rituals, but that's because you called this thing a ritual. I'm going to be sincere about this because this thing that looks like a ritual, you call it a ritual. I say it's the real thing, and therefore we should treat it like the real thing.
Right. Well, I think that the thing about law, they don't say it, they don't talk about this, but here's in their defense. Law understands itself to be only a small part of human life, and it understands that it cannot govern most of human life. It relegates itself to a little corner if you do something really bad.
Right.
Uh, and I think that they think it's okay. Similarly with a contract, right? A very, very small subpart of our interactions are governed by contract. The danger about these fundamentalist um, movements, which would be the same danger as I think you get in the sort of politically progressive reform movements, is this kind of totalizing character where they would then obliterate all other rituals. Law doesn't threaten to obliterate all other rituals because it doesn't, its domain is just not that big.
I think you're expressing yourself too strongly there. So if we look at these examples of the things they criticize, the Calvinists and the nationalist and the romantic, etc. Some of those are consistent with each other. That is, you could be, you
Yeah.
know, have be truly in love or not, and be truly devoted to your nation, and truly believe in your God. All of those could be true, but they are large. They ask a lot. They aren't necessarily totalizing, but they are large, and maybe they could plausibly say implausibly large. That is the the size of the view you have to take this idea of whether I'm truly in love is the key measure of things, uh, is just too big. You have to do too much damage to too many things to impose that on such a large scope.
Um, right. I mean, I was not yeah, like I guess I'm uh uh I think that they think of the religious fundamentalism as those things taken to a certain extreme. Um,
An excessive extreme.
yes. But maybe that, um, they those other things that are not as dangerous are naturally going to tend towards fundamentalism over time.
So it is striking here that the thing that they're most critiquing is this idea of a true feeling, which is, you know, a relatively tiny part of the set of all things that there are. So, they don't really criticize the idea of galaxies or atoms or all sorts of sort of strange things we might postulate as being in the world and relevant for things. Uh, it's the as idea that a true feeling should be the thing governing some particular set of practice. That's the thing they are focused on. True love or true being saved or things like that. And then it is interesting to notice that, in fact, we do have many views where a particular feeling is said to govern a very wide scope of behavior. Am I really in love, for example? Um, and that's maybe is just worth noting how, in some sense, extreme that view is. That in a huge world of all these complicated behaviors and feelings and people interacting and everything, that there would be some true feeling in your self that's stable across time or relatively unidimensional, and that it would, in fact, govern and control reasonably this huge area of behavior.
Right. I mean, I guess I think that there's gonna be a lot of work of the religion dictating what your feeling is. So,
Sure.
it's not like you just have to look inside all the time. Um, it's like you're told what you feel partly.
Well, the "am I saved" is, there's all this rules about what it will take to become saved, and then if you are saved, that, is a binary thing that affects all your relationship with the universe and life and everything else afterwards. But, the idea that there would be this binary "am I saved" thing is a pretty surprising fact about the world if it were true, and perhaps implausible, and the same as "am I in love" as a binary thing might also just be a pretty implausible fact about the world. And so, we might say, well, they're getting at some reasonable critique of this thing called sincerity. It's not necessarily that ritual is the answer to it per se, but I guess it's partly an answer. But it's just noteworthy to see this critique of this thing in the world that's called sincerity, and to see what I would call a relatively coherent critique of it. To say, because ritual is full of all this complexity and detail and everything else. And then, the idea is you just keep practicing all this detail, and then your life, which is a complicated thing, will slowly go better. And you might at least, well, that's at least comparing a complicated thing to a complicated thing and imagining that a complicated thing produces a complicated outcome through a lot of, various channels. And that's at least plausible at that level. So it's the postulation of this extreme simplicity as the thing that governs huge scopes of complicated activity. I think that's a reasonable critique to say that's implausible. And if you push that too far, things are just going to break and you're not going to be happy. Am I really a German? Why should there be such a thing as whether you're really a German and can really enjoy being in Germany?
Right. But it seems like that pressure is very close to the kind of conceptual pressure that we were putting on, like, what is this space of ritual? Like, do you believe it? Is it real? Or is it that you're pretending that it's real? Or is it that you're not thinking about the question of whether it's real? Um, um, like, it looks like there's a problem making sense of yourself when you're in this space of ritual. And there's a pressure that's gonna come from that, from the demand to make sense of oneself. Do I mean this? Is this for real?
Right. So then a reasonable response would be to say, well, the space of possible belief is really large and complicated. It's not a binary believe or not. You can sort of believe it to various degrees in various senses in various moods. And that would be the sort of complexifying response to the do I really believe it? Well, you sort of believe it in some ways, but what else would you think?
I think that there's something destabilizing about noticing that when you say please, you are, supporting the illusion of equality. That undermines your ability to say please.
Especially with somebody you feel superior to.
Right. Or with somebody where you haven't thought about this question. I mean,
Right,
but most of all with somebody where you've said this to them about the please being the illusion of equality.
right.
Um, so we can say this line about, well, there's all different kinds of beliefs, but um, it's not an accident that like, I can't say to you while, let's say I'm saying please, I'll be like, "In many ways, I don't see you as my equal." Because there's lots of different kinds of belief and,
Right, yeah.
no, it looks like I really have to pretend in that context, like I kind of all the way believe that you are, um, to the point even of not saying it, right? When you really believe something,
Right.
you think to assert it because it's such an obvious presupposition of the encounter.
You're making me realize these as if worlds have a number of simplifications, and one of them is that our beliefs are more starkly binary in them. That's kind of the point of them, because in those worlds, when your beliefs are starkly binary, we can reason more about them. You either believe this or you disagree with
Right.
it.
Do you love me? You're like, well,
Right.
what belief has many meanings. It depends what the meaning of is,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
that's not gonna work. It's like yes or no. Um, uh, and I think that's right that a lot of these spaces of ritual have this interestingly digital character. Like there's three options or something,
Right.
or there's two things. There's you this or not this, and they're delimited in those ways. And there's like a lot of different possible moves that are just not in that space. That don't exist as far as that space goes.
And that simplifies it and makes it so. For example, in the please and thank you, the simplified world is I'm either your friend or your enemy. And
Right.
pick which. Oh, I'm your friend. Okay, there we go. Now we're done.
Right. And it's like when a kid doesn't say thank you and you because when they got a present and you criticize them for it. Um Like, they might say, "Look, there are all sorts of possible reasons why I didn't say thank you. There's a whole
Right.
space of them," right? And you're like, "No, there's only one, which is you were being rude, and you gotta say thank you." And so, like, we live in the world with these 2 options, and you've gotta pick the other one. And that's also a fact about ritual. So, yeah, I guess, like, the thing is that in the non-ritual world, you can make the move you just made about all different flavors of belief, but uh, doesn't look like we're asking about the ritual world. We're asking about what it's like
Right.
to inhabit that world and to wonder whether you're really in it or not.
And actually, I think in terms of practicing through our lives, most of the time in our lives, almost all of it for most people would be spent in various as if worlds with very simplified rules. And you have to, becoming an academic or a philosopher or something, do all this work to realize that you have these more options in the real world. But those are real worlds that you almost never inhabited before.
Yeah.
Like just the very idea you could have degrees of belief, for many people, they had just never heard of that. And suddenly you have this new option of degrees of belief, but that's because at some point in their life, they were informed that in the larger real world, you have more options, really. But for most of their life, they spent in these simplified worlds where they didn't. And then, in fact, most of their life after school, they will go back to worlds where they don't actually have these options.
Right. Like in a conversation, you don't have degrees of belief. In most conversations, I want to know, like, look, are you arguing for P or not? Are you defending
Right.
it? Are you defending the opposite? And I'm not interested in your that's private, but as for the part of the conversation goes, if you're defending it, then you're asserting it. And then that's 100%, right? You believe it with probability 1, right? With
Right.
like as though it were a tautology.
And
That
and we academics pride ourselves perhaps on being more sophisticated and having a wider range of stances we can take on various issues than say most people would discuss it. But there's a set of assumptions in the as if world of academia that, I don't speak about it unless I'm a world expert, and then I'm going to publish on it, that it's had proper referee, evaluation.
Right. It's the as if world of academia is still a social world, and so it's still got its own set of as if rules, and which are binary, and uh one of the rules is you spend a lot of time talking about how binaries are bad.
Right.
Um, but like they're not ever in between. They're always like good or bad, and usually bad. So
Right.
um
Right. So I'm starting more to think that this as if world thing is just the usual case. And we actually find it quite hard to do anything but that. I mean, we have to work pretty hard to find a way to have a conversation where the usual as if rules don't apply.
I had a kind of crazy thought, which is there used to be this conceit, or rather, there was a historian. I don't remember when he must be probably early 20th century. I think his name was Bruno Snell. I'm gonna look it up right now because it's gonna be like very embarrassing if I get this totally wrong. I mean, it's probably already enough that I don't. And yeah, Discovery of Mind. Who thought that um, the ancient Greeks, didn't really have something like, um, a kind of self-consciousness or inner mental life. Um, and, this point of view on the ancient Greeks was sort of ridiculed afterwards as absurd. But you might think, here's a way to think about like, if we go back to this book about ritual and we see the tight connection between um sort of the world of ritual and the being less into sincerity, authenticity, the privacy of your mind and intent, we can actually flip the thought you had earlier, which is not that they doubt the reality of the ritual world because they give priority to their inner mental life, but that the very idea of having an inner mental life is just a way to wonder about whether the ritual world is real. That is, the consciousness springs into being when you start to question ritual, and there's got to be something else, right? And then the real me is not in this interaction, and it's like somehow now in my head or something like that. So the thought would be that the I mean, this would in a way be pushing against the line that they give in the book, not exactly because I wanna defend the inner world of authenticity, but that inner world of authenticity and sincerity only comes into being when the ritual world collapses in some way. So it's a sign that something has gone wrong with ritual. The ritual was not able to sustain itself as a reality. That's when you get self-consciousness. That would be the very unfashionable defense of Snell.
Well, I think we often have this idea that somebody is making a promise and do they intend to keep it. So that's, I think, one of the ways in which we ask about sincerity most naturally in our world. Somebody promise I pay them and they're going to deliver tomorrow. Do they intend to deliver tomorrow? Are they going to run away? I, marry somebody. They promise to be faithful. Well, do they intend to be faithful? Things like that. I have a soldier who I assign as a scout who says he'll come back. Does he intend to come back? Is he just going to escape the war as a scout? I mean, it does seem like for even before the Greeks, we would have had those sorts of concerns about whether people's words corresponded to their
I think it
intention state.
it would be like, is he brave? Um, is he just? Um, I don't think they would say, does he intend? Uh, so here's the thing they talk about in the book that like in the world of sincerity, lying becomes really significant as an evil thing. And like you're supposed to be honest and you're not supposed to lie. You're supposed to say what you really think in your head. And it struck me, I don't think I mentioned this, but like in ancient Greek, the word for to lie is pseudosthai, which means to say something false. And if you say something false by accident, it's the same word. They don't have a separate word that means to lie.
Right.
And they do point out that in like a lot of Greek literature, you get things like the noble lie. That's Plato, right? You get these telling of myths in the Platonic dialogues where there's kind of a lack of concern for whether or not they're true. Um, and so it looks like at least some of the modern world's kind of obsession with Do you really mean it? Like, do you really intend? Are you saying the truth? Are you being honest? Um, is not shared by these ancient societies. And another thing they bring up is about like there are a lot of ways to talk about cleverness that is just a way of saying like what we would call lying, but from their point of view, it could be you're good at manipulating things. There's a kind of cleverness in uh, Odysseus being polytropos, being a manifold kind of person. Um, which is to say, he sometimes promises stuff and then just doesn't go through with it, and gets away with the whole thing. That's how awesome he is. Um, so yeah, it may just be that we carve things up a little bit differently because we live in the world of sincerity because ritual collapsed. It abandoned us. We
Right. So there's been this decline of ritual. I guess, I mean, it's nice to come up with theories for why it declined, but then there's a problem of too much. If you have too many different theories that all explain the same thing, you wonder, well, they can't all be right,
Yeah.
or there'd be a big coincidence. So, one explanation here for the decline of ritual is this increase in priority of sincerity. More.
That's the explanation I'm offering.
No, no, but
That's
that's
what
what the
the
book is offering. The
right,
book is
right. I'm
offering.
saying goes the other way. You prioritize sincerity because ritual collapses. Yeah, go
Okay, but then we need some other reason why ritual would have collapsed.
right.
And then another, I mean, I think I wrote a blog post today about was just the idea that rituals tend to be relatively specific and copied relatively precisely, at least religious rituals. And then a lot of more ancient behavior in a lot of parts of your lives could be like that because the world was pretty stable. But as the world's changing more rapidly, um, you need to copy other people's behavior at a higher level of abstraction, not just copy all the exact details, but you know, copy at a level that you could then generalize. And so that may also explain the reduction of religious ritual because we're more importantly trying to find a robust description that will, a way you can do the church service not here but out out in the woods, on a riverboat. Like if your life's going to have all these different changes, then we need to give you rituals that you could then apply and generalize, and then there'll be less attention to lots of specific details and more sort of the general point of the general structure of it.
Right. So a lot of stuff about um, you know, w- women officiants in Christianity or Judaism, like is that the continuation, right? Or gay marriage as a form of marriage. Those are attempts to copy the tradition at a higher level of abstraction. Because if we copied it too in too much detail, we would have to say, well, no, you can't have gay marriage, or no, you can't have women rabbis, or something like that. Um,
Well, the Confucian story in the beginning of the book says, look, you copy specific rituals, but then you're supposed to generalize from that to all the other behavior. And a sage is a person who learns the rituals so well that they could always do the right thing no matter what showed up.
right, right, right. But then that was dangerous. That was then what raised the problem of, and then they can sort of innovate. When you have once you have too many sages, it's a problem of too many sages, right? Where then it looks like you don't need the rituals, and also they can innovate in an indefinite number of ways. You have to just trust them. And then you end up closing down the canon and being like, "No, no more innovation. This is how we have to do it." Um, so and we kinda got rid of sages, I feel like, a long time ago.
And you have to wonder why. I mean, people liked Gandalf, the wizard character in Lord of the Rings, but he wasn't so much a sage. He didn't offer a lot of advice. He just, was able to do a lot of things. But uh, it is
Yeah, we have, like, geniuses and stuff, like, people who
right.
are allowed to break the rules. So, maybe that's the sort of genius character, but, um
Yeah, they're not so seen as wise in the same way. Like a sage is supposed to like be generally wise about lots of different things, and a genius like figures one really thing out, but it doesn't mean they're great about the rest of their life.
but I was suggesting a reason why, um, ritual would collapse. Namely, conceptual incoherence. It just collapsed under the weight of its conceptual incoherence, which would predict that what you would get is an abandonment of local small scale rituals, and at the same time, a kind of striving for totalizing universal ritual that you get in the religious fundamentalism or political reform movements, or um, the ritual to end all rituals. So it could just be that this whole as if thing just does not make that much sense, and like eventually, we realized it didn't make that much sense, and we stopped being able to do it.
I mean, we still say please and thank you. So, I mean, there's a lot of these small scale conversational rituals we definitely are doing as if, Lynn.
Right. I agree, but we are also, pretty willing to give them up. Uh, like, under pressure, they don't hold up.
Right. Although, I mean, again, I am struck by this overall critique, which says that these larger totalizing worlds you construct that you think are the real worlds, to the extent they are just another construction for convenience, like with binaries, because that's easier to talk in terms of, et cetera, then you're going to get into trouble when you rely on them too strictly.
Absolutely, but it's not clear to me that defeating those approaches is the win that these authors think it is for their ritual favored view, because that might be the last refuge of ritual. So by destroying it, they're just that's it. That's the end of ritual then.
Maybe we just become capitalist, selfish, crude animals, the sort they fear we would become without ritual.
That's one possibility. Or we find our next thing. But like I do think that there's something very powerful in the thought that um this subjunctive space of ritual points to something that's sort of at the heart of what culture is. Culture is a set of rules that we follow and we sort of pretend that they're natural. We pretend that they're the rules of how things really always have to be, that there's a kind of necessity to them that they don't have. And that's it may just be that that was a sort of temporary bit of technology that is dying out.
It is a striking fact that we just have this capacity to do as if, and we are really inclined to use it a lot, but as it doesn't take very much of a prodding for us to fall into it with other people around us or to pick up the habits of as if that people are doing, just go along with them.
Right.
I think we're about out of time.
Yes.
All right. Till we talk again.